Just welcome everyone. We're having a really important topic today called the geography of grief. And we're very excited to have Jennifer Springsteen and folks from MHAO. Just want to share, some details on this slide. We'll go over these in more detail. My name is Christina Clayton. I'll start with that. I'm one of the co-directors of the Northwest MHTTC. It stands for Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, but essentially it's training and TA, and that's an easier way to understand what we do. We're not an app or a computer program. It's always confusing with the name. But we really want to start first with our land acknowledgement. And we do this not in a sort of perfunctory or checkbox way. This really means a lot to us, and want to engage you all to reflect on the lands in which you reside and work, and acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who've had their lands forcibly taken. And we always want to work towards being better stewards of these lands and commit to action and advocacy and change and support and education. And so we have 272 federally recognized tribes in our Region 10 alone. So that's Alaska, Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. So it's important that we mention that. So we'll put a link to the chat if you want to know the stewards of your land. So really appreciate Native land. Next, we'll introduce our network. So if you haven't been to one of our events, in short, we're a nationwide network. We're supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and that is sometimes called SAMHSA. And so we have 10 regional centers and 2 national centers, American Indian Alaska Native, and a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. They're also the same networks for addiction and prevention. And so if you don't know how to reach those, reach out to us. We'll get you those links. But we all do similar things. We support resource development, training and TA, webinars and that sort of thing. And so lots of resources for you. And you can actually take most of the events across all the networks, no matter who's putting them on, for free. And that's what's really important about our network. A little bit about our Northwest Center. We are sited at University of Washington in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And our goals are the same as the network. So we want to support evidence-based and other culturally relevant practices, heighten your knowledge and skills, foster alliances with our diverse communities and your training needs, and sharing the free training and TA that we have. Our network area of focus is evidence-based practices for psychosis, such as CBT or assertive community treatment, but it's not the only thing that we train on. And certainly not everyone here, as I can see, is from the Region 10 area, because that's the beauty of a virtual format. So, but how do we do that? We do live and recorded webinars. So if you wanted someone to see this after it was done, you could share the link when we get that up. We do virtual learning communities for Region 10. We have online self-paced courses, all which are free. We do a newsletter, we have a resource library, and we have a podcast. So I always talk with most of our presenters for 15, 20 minutes before webinars generally. So you'll get to see that as well if you want to listen to Jennifer and I chat when that's put up as well. So, oops, I just sped right through a bunch of things. I apologize. So next we'll talk about language. It's important, and we agreed as a network to share this slide that we want to use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all the work we're involved in. We're all probably in the helping professions, and we know that some of these things can be sensitive topics and bring up issues. And we're just always asking that people think about being respectful, non-judgmental, and inclusive when we're communicating. It hasn't really been an issue, but we want to make sure that we highlight that as we get started. Next, some logistics. You are muted, your video is off because it's a webinar and there are 159 people right now. And so we'll want to make sure that, we still can hear from you. So how can you do that? You can use the chat as people are doing. Where are you from? A little say hi, reflection on something. If you're having a tech problem, we have our fabulous team, Gabrielle and Peyton in the background, helping with the back end stuff, making it all run. And they're putting things in the chat as well. If you have a technical issue or anything like that, that's where you'll put that. If you have a question for Jennifer, please put it in the Q&A button. And so we can't copy and paste stuff. So if you put a question in the chat, we can't copy and paste it. I don't know why, but we might prompt you to please do that because we want to queue those up for the end. So I'll be paying attention to that. and might remind you across the way, just in case we can make sure we get to as many of those as possible. Please don't wait till the very end, because then I can't tell how many questions that we might have ready for Jennifer. So throw them in at any time and we'll get to those near the end. We do have an evaluation. Your feedback is really important to our work. And so we have literally, it's 2 minutes, a survey that you can do. It's confidential. We don't know who's done what. And it just asks for a few questions. And then you can put in some things about what you thought about the session. And we look at those in an aggregated way every time. And we share those, aggregated results with the speakers, so we can know that, how did it go? Did you like it? Do you want something different? Did you really appreciate something and want more of that? We also are required to do this by our funder, but more importantly, we really do look at your feedback. So it helps keep the free training coming. And so thank you in advance. Also, disclaimer, they fund us, SAMHSA, but they don't know all the details of what we're doing in each of our events. So that's our required disclaimer. I will give you a preview that when you get the evaluation link, it will ask for a now fairly lengthy personal code. This is a one-time event. Pick any numbers and letters that you're comfortable with. We won't need them for anything else later. So just put in what's most important is getting your feedback. So thank you for your patience with those government forms. Before I get to today's presenter, I do want to note that, gosh, we are almost at 200 people, and I want to talk about our poll and see who's here in the room. So Peyton, if you can share the results, that would be fantastic. So I think those results should show on your screen now. I'm not sure if you're seeing, can anyone, well, how would we know? Can anyone in the audience say if you can see the results? That would be helpful.
Yes, people are seeing them, and I'm seeing them as well.
Excellent. Okay. I know that I'm not sure if I've seen the same thing. So yeah, a lot of different folks in the room, really helpful to see who's here. Always get a wide variety of folks. And so it's great to see a wide span around how long people have been in their positions as well. So grief, as you'll hear from Jennifer, it works for everybody to learn more about this topic. So I'm going to stop sharing. You can close out the results if you'd like, and we'll move on to Jennifer. So I have the pleasure of introducing Jennifer Springsteen, who is a writer and teacher in Portland, Oregon. She is in her final year of seminary, seeking her Master's of Divinity, and is currently serving as the intern minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Vancouver, Washington. She's been offering grief workshops for the past 5 years to writers, folks identifying as dually diagnosed, seminarians, and congregates. And Jennifer, it was so great to meet with you earlier today. I will hand this over to you. Thank you so much for being here, and everyone, you're in for a real lovely journey here as we talk about this topic. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Christina. I'm so glad to be with you here today and to be with all of you. I see people are continuing to pop in, and that's great. So I welcome you in. So I am in my final 2 months of seminary. I can't believe this journey is coming to a beginning, I guess. And so just a little bit of how things started for me doing grief work, mainly during the pandemic. In seminary, we're required to study pastoral counseling, some psychology, although we aren't psychologists when we are ministers and caring for people that we work with, either in the community, in a parish, in a hospital, as chaplains. We take courses on illness, health, and healing. And during my illness, health, and healing course, it was the spring of 2020, and everything shut down. And we seminarians realized that we had some deeper work to do on both our personal grief, things that were coming up for us as we're locked in our homes alone or with a few people, and also exploring collective grief and what this meant to be grieving as a whole nation and as a whole earth. It also had me exploring the geography of grief and in terms of environmental grief. So I have done exploration in a 3-day retreat where we did some deep diving into environmental grief. which is a topic that is very heavy for a lot of us. And then through these journeys, I'll give you the shape of that later, but I discovered a man named Francis Weller who wrote a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And it's a book that really changed how I saw and noticed grief and how it physically exists within our bodies. And then that's something that we've been exploring more and more as a society as to how grief exists within our bodies, in our DNA, how it's passed on from our ancestors, and how we pass it on to those who will come behind us. So the container for today, if you're here today, you are experiencing grief, whether personally or with the people that you're working with. And I'd like you to have this time also be a time that you get to tend to the grief that you're experiencing, letting go of all the experiences of others, if you've been working with grief with others, and tending to the grief that you have right now in your mind and heart. So we'll do some sort of a truncated version of a grief session that I would offer for sessions. So let's start with a poem. This poem is from Ninan Soto's poem, Spilling the Light, or book of poems called Spilling the Light, and this is the title poem. To what have we promised ourselves? To this moment in time and place, to this community, and even tenderly interconnected to this planet. We promise ourselves to the idea that we are each and all human beings. We promise that there is something moving between us that we cannot tame and cannot measure. The chalice is a reminder that what flame we keep inside us cannot light the way. The light must spill to shine. The thing you must be is yourself, unadulterated, shedding the willingness to journey alone, as though you were made of something hard and unforgivable. You are human. You belong right here, right now, and leave only open the possibility that the future is a space for growth. So with Soto's poem, welcome. And now I'd like to share some of the words of Francis Weller, the writer that I spoke of, his 5 gates of grief. And Gabrielle, if you could share that slide with folks. Thank you. So again, these concepts of the 5 gates of grief are from Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And we can link to that book. It's phenomenal. So Weller talks about these 5 gates. The first gate is that everything we love, we will lose. And then this is the gate that you all know, from your first pet to your dearly beloved. Losing people, losing things, life that changes into a different space. The second gate is the places that have not known love. And Weller says we cannot grieve for something that we feel is outside of our circle of worth. And so we must first retrieve these often shameful places and neglectful places that we have pushed and pushed away. These dark places of loss can be childhood abuse, trauma, abortion, living in poverty with substance abuse, or both. These are the places that we need our love and tending. Things that we feel are outside our circle of worth, that we are grieving. The third gate is the sorrows of the world. We knew this in COVID. We've experienced this with wildfire, with animal and plant species lost, environmental loss, and environmental grieving, war, refugee camps, starvation, food shortages. All of these are the sorrows of the world. And this is a gate that I was so surprised and excited isn't necessarily the word, but I was so glad to hear of this gate, because ever since I was a child, I've had this deep grief for animals and the suffering of animals. And I thought, wow, there must be something wrong with me. Other people say, oh, I love animals, but I would feel just so overwhelmed by it. And I was glad to know that this is a gate that exists for so many of us. When we hear news of fires and just the world falling apart, feeling that we can't do what we feel like we should go out and take action. There's that desire to go and fix, and we can't. So we hold it within our body. We hold it within the tissue of our body. The fourth gate is what we expected and did not receive. And it's similar to the second gate. This is one that seems a little bit nebulous, but hopefully it will make sense to you. This gate is not simply linked to blame, like, gosh, my parents didn't love me enough, although that could be some of it. But it's also a deep longing for community, for connection with people and earth, to be solidly and unabashedly loved. It's difficult because sometimes we don't even know what it is that we're grieving when we stand at this gate. We feel like the gifts that we have to bring to the world are not recognized or noticed, that we can't fully experience and be a part of the community in which we live. And I've heard from the trans young people that I've worked with that this is a gate that they feel that they are often standing before, because who they are and the gifts they're bringing forth are not recognized for the full person that they are. And the fifth gate is ancestral grief. And this is the grief that we carry in our bodies from the sorrows that we've experienced by our ancestors. And there's a whole nother conversation about healing ancestral grief. But if we can heal some of this grief within us, then we will pass less of this grief forward to the people that come after us. If we can help tend this space, we can change some of the DNA that is holding the depth of that grief. Not fixing, not making it go away, but that we can help reshape some of that by tending to it, which is what we're talking about doing today. So thank you for sharing that slide. One of the things that I had studied, we began to study in seminary, is ritual. And when I moved this workshop, the Geography of Grief, from a writing workshop only, exploring our grief through writing, and I began to learn more about ritual and the importance of ritual, I started to see that this was a key piece that seemed to be missing from the work that I was doing with people. And there's a West African ritualist named Melodoma Patrice Somé. Maybe you've heard of him. Francis Weller had gone to his village to learn more about ritual and what rituals were happening in his village. But and I'll hold up the book, although it may not be able to be seen. But ritual is a part of every piece of their community. There are personal rituals that people do, their family rituals, and then their community rituals. And all these rituals, he insists that we use in order to be healthy, that we must take time with our grief, and then cultural ritual is a way to take time with our grief. So I'm going to offer a few of these rituals. One that I will offer right now is simply lighting a candle. Sometimes we say if we're in constant motion, if I run, if I'm very busy, if I stay late at work, if I do all these busy things, I'm not going to have time to think about my grief. And that's when we push it down. That's when it becomes a part of our body, and it will return. You can push it away, but it will return. It is still there. Grief is an active and alive thing. So one thing I'd like to offer in terms of a ritual is just taking a moment with a candle, sitting at the kitchen table, lighting a candle, considering the grief that you are experiencing at that moment, and then you blow your candle out. It's not fixing, it's not that the grief goes away, but that you've taken the time to reflect on it and to give it some space in your life. So let's do that now. And when I light the candle, think about which of those gates that you may be standing before today. You may be standing before many, either having lost somebody that you love, feeling like there are places that have not known love in your life, sorrows for the world, ancestral grief, or having or the fourth grief which is eluding me right now. Oh, what we expected and did not receive. So when I light the candle, think about which of those gates that you may be standing before today. And you can close your eyes if you wish. You can let your eyes fall into soft focus. And just consider which of those gates you may be at the threshold of right now. And how you got there. How that feels in your body to be there. I will blow out the candle and we'll return together. Obviously, if this were a ritual that you were doing, you could take as much time as you needed. That's a very simple way to just pause during the day, sit with your grief, tending to that grief. When I was mentioning, I keep saying that our grief is in our body, and I wanted to give you an example of a woman whose hospital room I visited when I was doing a chaplain internship. I went into the hospital room, and this woman had said, it's just been a revolving door. I have just been in and out of the hospital over and over again. They can't tell what's wrong with me. And I said, okay. So what's going on? And she said, well, it's just, I've got all this, GI stuff, and we just can't figure it out. I said, okay, but what's going on? What's going on with you? What's happening? And then as we got to talk, she told me that her mother had died about 2 years before, and she hadn't had a chance to really grieve. And then we learned that I learned that her father had died long before, when she was just a child. And I asked her how her mother had grieved for her father. And she said, I don't think she did. She was so busy with us kids, and she had so many things to do, and she kept going. And I said, well, that kind of sounds like what you're doing. It sounds like you're busy with your kids and you're running around, but yet you keep ending up here. And then she just exploded with her tears to realize, yes, she hadn't taken the time that she needed to grieve her mother. And as we worked together and explored, she was very afraid and worried of going into that place of grief for her mother. So instead, we decided on a gratitude jar of writing one thing that she really appreciated about her mother every day. And that would be a way for her to begin the exploration of grief for her mother. But she was physically unable to move past this grief. It was was permeating where she was physically. And we have doctors that are curing, but there is healing that needs to take place. And it will never completely be healed, but healing is of the spirit, and the spirit needs healing. Another ritual that has been used in many cultures over and over again, almost every culture has some idea of creating either a holy day around or some way to say the name of people who have passed over as a way to honor our ancestors, to pray for them, to revere them, and then calling out the names of those that we love and miss. And as we've seen with Black bodies and brown bodies being harmed, and the saying their names out loud, say their names, that is another way of honoring people that have passed before us. I think that saying the name out loud is a way to sort of bend that membrane between this world and the other world. Speaking their names allows us to recognize them, and for them to recognize that we are calling them. So I'm going to read another poem and then ask us to say the names of either our beloveds or a species that we miss and are connected to. This poem is by Kathleen McTeague, and it is called "They Are With Us Still." It's right to remember the names of those who gave us strength in this choice of living. It is right to name the power of the hard lives well lived. We share a history with those lives. We belong to the same motion. They too were strengthened by what had gone before. They too were drawn on by the vision of what might come to be. Those who lived before us, who struggled for justice and suffered injustice before us, have not melted into the dust and have not disappeared. They are with us still. The lives they lived hold us steady. Their words remind us and call us back into ourselves. Their courage and love evoke our own. We, the living, carry them with us, with their voices, their hands, and their hearts. We take them with us, and with them choose a deeper path of living. So you are on mute. I invite you to say the name of your loved one or a species or something that you want to say out loud. Please put names in the chat. Let's just take a moment to call out and revere the names of these people and things that have gone before us that we miss and want to stay connected to. So let's do that now. I will mute too. Those were beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone. And that is a ritual that you can combine with the candle lighting. You can light a candle. You can say the names of your beloveds out loud. I know that many of you have heard another tradition is to lay a plate at the dinner table for the person or cause or people that you love. Something that you want to feed and give back to. All these beloveds in the room with us in these in this energetic room that we're sharing today. Thank you for sharing those. So I asked you to bring a notebook. If you have a notebook, you can also just type on your computer, however you feel most comfortable. Sometimes when people are, if they're not comfortable journaling, if it's not something that they always do, I had one woman say, why should I write a sadness journal? And journaling doesn't have to be a sadness journal, although it can be. My mom saved my middle school journals, and they were sadness journals. It was hard to read. But it could also just be a way of digging in and reflecting. There is something about writing. I think there's something about physically writing on a piece of paper with a pen, a physical act, if that is, if you're able to do that. But even if you're just grabbing a phrase, you can open up a thesaurus, you can grab a book of poems and pick one word, rose, moonlight, and just write any memories that you have of that one thing. And the more you do it, and the more you get comfortable with it, and the more you'll be comfortable with reflecting on memory, on ideas, and then soon it can be a way that you can start tending to grief or sorrow that you're experiencing, because you're used to taking time for yourself to consider, to meditate and consider and reflect in this way. A lot of it is just getting to know yourself. And I know when we talk about self-care, people think about, these expensive retreats or getting a pedicure, but journaling is an act of self-care. And it can be an act of defiance too, against what other people are suggesting as self-care, but you are caring for yourself when you're allowing memory and idea and perspective to come forth. So let's try that now. Gabrielle's going to share this piece from the Library of America. It's Eve Ewing reading her own poem. I saw Emmett Till this week at the grocery store. So we'll watch and then I'll offer a prompt to you.
Hi, this is Eve Ewing, and I'm going to be reading a poem I wrote called I Saw Emmett Till This Week at the Grocery Store. I wrote this poem in 2017 on the anniversary of Emmett Till's murder, and it's inspired by a lot of things, one of which is a line from a poem by my friend Fatima Oscar, in which she says, "I wish them only a mundane life." And I got to thinking about what a radical demand that is in the face of tremendous violence. The idea that somebody would have the right to just live out a regular, boring life. And I thought about the fact that Emmett Till is one of the most famous figures in American history and one of the most impactful figures in American history. But it's because he was murdered so unjustly at such a young age. And so this poem imagines an alternate reality in which Emmett Till gets to just grow old and be boring and normal. And I run into him at the grocery store. The poem is also very much part of the Afrofuturist strand of my work. A lot of my work is around reimagining time and space and kind of fuzzifying the boundaries between time and space as we usually understand them. So those are some of the themes of the poem, and I hope you enjoy it. I saw Emmett Till this week at the grocery store. Looking over the plums, one by one, lifting each to his eyes and turning it slowly, a little earth, checking the smooth skin for pockmarks and rot or signs of unkind days or people, then sliding them gently into the plastic, whistling softly, reaching with a slim woolen arm into the cart. He first balanced them over the wire before realizing the danger of bruising, and lifting them back out, cradling them in the crook of his elbow until something harder could take that bottom space. I knew him from his hat, one of those fine pork pie numbers they used to sell on Roosevelt Road. It had lost its feather, but he had carefully folded a dollar bill and slid it between the ribbon and the felt, and it stood at attention. He wore his money. Upright and strong, he was already to the checkout by the time I caught up with him. I called out his name and he spun like a dancer, candy bar in hand, looked at me quizzically for a moment before remembering my face. He smiled. Well, hello, young lady. Hello, so chilly today. I should have worn my warm coat like you. Yes, so cool for August in Chicago. How are things going for you? Oh, He sighed and put the candy on the belt. It goes. It goes. Thank you so much. That poem is called I Saw Emmett Till this week at the grocery store. You can find it in my second collection of poems, 1919.
Isn't that a wonderful poem? That's so lovely. And lovely to hear a poet read their own work. So for our journaling, I invite you to write about a person, an animal, a natural object, a place, or even an event, something or someone that no longer exists in this reality or no longer exists as you once knew it. So let me say that one more time. Write about a person, animal, natural object, place, or event, something or someone that no longer exists in this reality, or it no longer exists as you once knew them or it. So write about them as if they were continuing on, the same way that Eve Ewing did, that they're continuing on, that they're here with you today. And you can start with these words. Here's what I want to tell you. And let's just write for 5 minutes. Take a moment to just jot. You can jot notes or however you want to do this journaling. Here's what I want to tell you. So 5 minutes. Here's what I want to tell you. Let's take just one more minute to find a last line or to end your thoughts for now. And that is time. And I know 5 minutes is not enough time to write on that topic, probably, or any other. But if you aren't used to journaling, setting your timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and just making yourself continue to push through and keep writing until your timer goes off, then you'll get in the habit. And then eventually you'll be able to just go into that real deep well of memory that creates a true connection to your soul and to who you are. So usually we read these, we'll read these aloud, but they're 200, there are only 200 folks, so we can't read these out loud. But I would like to suggest that you read this to someone, you read what you wrote to someone else so that they can witness what you've offered here. It's nice to have a witness to what we do. Well, I'm going to share another ritual idea. I know that we're getting close to time. I'm going to share some ideas for creating altars. And many of you know of the Day of the Dead altars, of creating those beautiful and elaborate altars. But in the work that I've done, even folks who seemed resistant to creating an altar, I'm like, oh, that's just, I don't have time for that, or it's kind of silly, or I don't have any room or space, said that just the act of creating an altar for a person or for the loss of a species or an environmental loss made a real difference to them to create that altar and then to keep it up. So I just want to give you a few, just 4 examples of altars that people have done and invite you to do one yourself. So Gabrielle, would you mind showing our altars? And this first altar is just a super simple one. It's actually a desk that's tucked into the corner. An altar can include photos. This one has a tarot card, a medicine card, and rocks, and some seed pods there too, in memory of this person. And the next one is an example of creating an altar, just clearing off the corner of a bookshelf. It doesn't have to be huge. And this one is in memory of a mother who had passed. There's a closer up one of that one, just the very next slide. Yeah, just a little corner. This one has fresh flowers, which is always something that's nice to do, and to change them out with leaves or whatever season there is if you want to keep that one going. And let's look at the next one. This is the larger altar. An example of a larger altar that occupies its own table, has a singing bowl, another fresh flower. The panel there is the panel has Buddha, and it has Kuan Yin, and then there's another little statue of Kuan Yin, and then the traveling Buddha, a large chalice there in front. And there's a closer one of that one, or a further one, I guess, further away. Yeah, thank you. And then the last altar is one that somebody made that surprised me, and I think it's so endearing. It's just a windowsill altar that can change, and putting little pieces on an altar. So sometimes when you create a little spot like that, you may not realize that you're actually making an altar, but you're creating energy and inviting energy, and inviting in either ancestors or just inviting in love and space when you create that altar. So something very simple to do, ritual to do to tend to your grief. When you tend to your altar and keep it clean and dust it, you're tending to your grief. So let's read, I will read out loud the reprise from Ninan Soto's words, and then we can have some questions and answers. The thing you must be is yourself, unadulterated, shedding the willingness to journey alone as though you were made of something hard and unforgivable. You are human. You belong right here, right now. And together we'll chase away the sickness and the secrets and leave only the open possibility that the future is a space for growth. So thank you, everyone, and I am happy to answer some questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. This has been really powerful, and so far, as I anticipated, people haven't put major content questions. It's just so overwhelming, and it's so wonderful that you have made space for this. And I think we know in this field, as you and I spoke earlier, this is something that most of us, I guess, I hope all of us, chose to help others, whether it's called mental health, it's called behavioral health, it's called, some other kind of counseling, or just being in the world. And, I was sharing, and you put this in the description, that we just don't get training for this. We don't get training. It's just human beings, generally speaking, in my opinion. We don't get a lot of training in the field. And so people are welcome to put questions in the Q&A still. But since there aren't any right now, I guess I'm thinking about, how does grief affect us when we're helping others? How do we manage that position when we are dealing with our own griefs? Many things that we could talk about, people we've lost, historical things, climate crisis, and then be in a space. So, and right. So not, but, you
Mhm.
know, both. How do we also be in a space where we can help others deal with,
Mm.
not because there's an end point, as we talked about earlier, but also
Yeah.
deal with their grief? How do we hold our grief and help others with
Mhm.
their grief? I guess would be one question I would ask.
Yeah. Yeah, because those of us who are working with others are not immune to grief ourselves somehow, miraculously. Um, so one of the things I had done especially with Zoom and Zoom rooms during COVID, and working with people's grief, I was seeing my doctor, and I see a naturopath, and I um, I also, like the woman in the hospital, I was becoming sick, and I was feeling uncomfortable. And because after my session, I wasn't taking that time, I wasn't taking time to just sit for a moment and let things go. I don't know. This was my understanding and belief, was I also wasn't sort of I wasn't shooing those people that we called into the room back to their to their respective places. I felt like there were these ghosts in my house all the time because we'd called them in through Zoom. But then it reminded me that the same way that we prepare for a moment, we take a breath and we prepare before we start to work with someone, we need to do the same thing, that we need to exit that space. And and take time with ourselves, and to really be more intentional about letting go of those things that we just heard, and then doing all the things that we ask others to do, that we also do, because we don't all the time. We say, I'm going to journal, I'm going to sit and meditate. We offer these things to our clients or to other people around us, but then we don't do those things ourselves. So yeah, I guess practice what we preach, but making sure that we have that energy for ourselves too.
Well, as I suspected, questions are rolling in, so I apologize. I was on answered ones and missed. So here's a question. I don't know if there's an answer to this, but how long does ancestral grief last?
Well, I don't have a set answer for that either, but I will offer the name of a man named Daniel Foor, and his name is Foor, and he's written a lot about ancestral grief. I would also, the name of the ritualist that I talked about, Melodoma Patrice Sommet. They're both ritualists that talk about working with ancestral grief and healing ancestral grief. And one of the things that can be done is some deep meditation and tending the line. And Daniel Foor in particular talks about how we heal our own line. You move through your like your mother's mother, you move through the paternal side and the maternal side. And it's just a process of working with those genograms. Yeah, somebody put genograms could be helpful. Yeah. So you tend to the line, you begin working with the ancestors that are in a healthy space, that have become ancestors. Usually we use the word ancestor because that is someone who has passed over and who is in a healthy space. And then begin working with that ancestor with those who may not be as healthy, and finding ways and guides to create health within your past line, and then moving forward.
That.
It's a whole long study.
Yeah. Sorry, and I don't know, Chad, I really appreciate your comment to us as hosts. We have tried to remember to make posting questions anonymously a standard, and so I apologize if we missed that. I think it's now changed. Gabriel, thank you for that. It's very much on our minds, and want to make sure that's an option for you. So please, apologies. How do you, so I'm going to try and get through in our 20 minutes, the many questions that we have now, and they're just so touching and moving to read. How do you answer when someone asks, why me after losing a loved one? I mean, I think that why me after any loss or any grief inducing experience, how do you, and I'm sure that must come up all the time in the schooling and experiences you've had.
Yeah. And even if it hasn't been asked in that way directly, it's, I guess there's the input, it's implied that I'm suffering and I'm hurting. And the biggest worry I have is when that happens with suicide also, that there's a lot of absorbing of pain. And so I don't think that we don't have an answer for that. I mean, I think that if somebody asks that question directly, that you can simply say, I just don't know. I honestly don't know. And just start from this place of I'm communing with you, I'm connecting with you, and I'm listening to you. And I wish I knew. And then begin opening the conversation for what do you remember about them? What do you love about them? And then move the conversation into a place where there can be more healing for the spirit in a way that they're connecting with that person in love. And and then just witnessing whatever pain they want to offer.
Well, and it's last on this list, but I have to bring this up. Someone shared, and I'm just, so sorry for all the losses that I've seen mentioned in the chat, and that I know people thought about and talked about as we were writing and speaking aloud. Someone losing their son 10 years ago this year to a suicide. I mean, I just can't even, I can barely say these words. I have children myself. Being angry, you've lost a brother who you named your son for. You've spoken a lot about ritual. And so the question is, would it be a good idea to do a memorial? And I've, she's been sick ever since. And I don't know if any memorial had been done so far, Laura, but I think you're very pro ritual and, kind of to this question of why, like, we don't know what can get us through that. Unknowing seems to be coming back to some ritual that means something to you. So what do you say about doing ritual or memorial, however long it's been, whether it's been done before or not? How does ritual fit into your experience around dealing with grief?
Well, when I had read some of the questions that came in when people had registered, and I guess I really do want to offer ritual as, there's no end, there's no fix, but that ritual is a way that other cultures, and even in the West, we do have our memorials and we do things that create ritual, but designing a ritual around a birthday, designing a ritual around holidays that are celebrated, doing yearly rituals, monthly rituals. In the Jewish tradition, there's a set amount of time of deep grief right after somebody dies because it's just so heavy, and there's ritual there. And then there's a certain length of months after that. And then every single year, there is a ritual to remember that person. So when I was in talking with a rabbi, the idea was there's never an end to the grief. There's never an end to missing. So what we do then is we remember, and creating a ritual for you to remember. If that person liked movies, maybe you watch that movie every year with your loved ones. You go out for Thai, or you do something that makes sense for you and that person. And it might be painful, but then it also might be joyous as well.
Well, and related to this, because rituals come up as well, and a different question, what about something that isn't over yet? We know grief isn't over, but for someone living with a terminal illness or other deteriorating, condition, how does ritual attend that? And then most recently, I've heard a lot around this ambiguous loss when someone is missing. We don't know the answer. I've heard more and more about that, especially in Native communities, Indigenous communities that suffered more from these kind of unsolved crimes, and we don't know. So how do ritual and grieving work when the person is still here and or when we don't know what happened? And that's just got to be horrendous as well.
Yeah, well, what came to me with not knowing whether or not a person is still there would be to have rituals where their name is being said aloud and projected, whether or not it's chanted, whether they're in this reality or they're in another reality. Saying their name is going to, it kind of makes me like, but it will connect them to you. So. Yeah, I would really do the saying the name and chanting the name, writing the name. But there is something so important about the names that we've been given and why we respond to that name. So I, in that ambiguous situation, would continue to say the name as often as possible. It could be the candle lighting ritual and then chanting. It could be writing down the name, having the name be on an altar. And then with someone who is still with us, it could be as simple as having a poem that's read. If the person has a specific religious inclination to do whatever those rituals are, what kind of rituals do you like, or what do you like as a way of expanding and letting them know? It could be holding a crystal. It could be, there are all kinds of ways that you can bring ritual into that, whether it's a bedside or into their house. And I did see somebody that said that you don't say the name of an Indigenous person who has passed for a year. So in that case, not saying the name would be important.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's
some
nuances there that I know it's important to be in that context that is relevant and respectful. So thank you for clarifying that. How about back to the question, and I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. It says, you mentioned grief over abortion. What is your experience with grief over an adoption? And I may have misread that before. So meaning an adoption, you have, I assume the child has left your care and adopted out. I was thinking one could have grief over any number of things related to children, but yeah, any grief over, adoption that you've experienced? Or
well, I've worked with folks that have both given away, have searched for birth parents, and have been adopted parents. Every situation is different, even though there are a lot of similarities. There is that place of loss, and for some people, having a ritual around, it was their body giving birth. So having a ritual around the time either of conception or a ritual around the time of birth, or both, to celebrate that time of shared existence with the child, that could be a way of healing and connecting. And then when we were talking about doing some of the ancestral line healing for adopted folks, that was something that felt very important, was to do some meditation around their biological ancestors, as well as their adopted ancestors.
How about, and I was so pleased to hear you mention and show very, I know we're always trying to be conscious of co-opting culture and, accepting and then doing disrespect and disservice to cultures. But I was appreciative that you mentioned a variety of things that might be on an altar that you might talk about, the things you shared. And so I think you'll have an answer to this, how to work with, I'm sure you do. How do you work with folks who may identify as atheist or some other kind of identity, who don't believe in anything this person wrote spiritual, could be religious. I mean, obviously, you know, some people have had very bad experiences, harm, just maybe it's not their thing. How do we work with grief? You know, I'm assuming religious and spirituality is not necessarily a condition of dealing with grief, of course. But how does that come into play when you've seen that?
Well, as a Unitarian Universalist, I have, there are many congregants that do not identify with one religion or another, even though our religion is based in the Christian tradition. We have sort of shifted away from that and embraced some other types of religion. The creating of altars and the saying of names, although they have been used in different cultures and religions for years and years, they don't have to have that bent to them. I think if you're working with a group, just knowing who's there and how people identify and what they feel if they have been harmed by a certain religion. That's a grief in itself that needs to be tended. But I think that you can work through grief and do powerful, deep listening and witnessing without moving into one specific religion or another. You can read poetry that doesn't have to have a specific religion in it that is also very meaningful.
Another question, gosh, and this is a hard one. How do we reduce the anxiety about our own mortality when experiencing grief? So maybe we're working with someone else who's near end of life or having that kind of issue, but just mortality in general. You know, it's as we were talking about earlier, you know, I had a friend whose husband's father just passed away this week. Were they going to explain that to the children before he passed? How are they dealing with it now? And so I know at different ages, you know, that's got to be different, but it's something that's got to be triggered when you're working in places and just having people in your life face mortality. And now you're thinking about your own. So what do you share with people then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I'm at an anxious bedside or with people who are, you know, anxious around that, well, I will tap into what is it that they have in their life that creates joy, where they can feel calm. If somebody names a certain religion, then that's an easy place to move into. If there's poetry, or if there's chanting or other ways that I can help create calm at that bedside. Everybody's going to move into that place in a different way. And, you know, it's sort of a stumping question because it's when you're there with that anxiety, it's hard. I mean, it's just hard. It's hard to work with. It's hard to fix. You know, in COVID, it was hard because we weren't supposed to touch people, but we would hold hands. You know, I would say, what worries you the most? If it was the pain, we could talk about the pain. If it was being alone, we could talk about how there could be somebody in the room. So those are the types of things I did as a chaplain to try to help the fear go away. Could we sing? Could we bring in the harp? But ultimately, it is such a lonely journey coming out of the world.
Oh yeah. And just thinking about, you know, on one hand, we're talking about be present, be in the present moment, yet also honoring the past, acknowledging the past, and also not trying to worry because we don't know. Like that's literally the only thing. We don't know much other than what's happening right now. And but existentially, that's a real big weight on people. Yeah. I know we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask our team if they can put in, we do have a couple of events coming up. And so we'll just put those in the chat so we can just finish at least some of these questions. I don't know that we can get through all of them, but I'm going to try. So there's some family related questions, and without probably doing a great job of summarizing, but say, you know, a father is getting care and, someone is experiencing a lot of sadness, but you wonder, are my siblings feeling the same way? And then another thing regarding family is, what if there's estrangement or someone's involved in something, in this case, family still involved in like a cult type situation, but they are not. How do we deal with loss and grief with family? That's so complex. So knowing that there's 80 million permutations of what family and grief could look like, and rarely is everyone on the same page, I assume, on how and when and what the best thing is. How do you recommend people deal with that?
Wow, that's a lot.
Just a little softball for you right here at the end. No, I know these are complex, tough questions.
I think that my suggestion would be to start with one's self. When we talk about systems theory and working with families, is that we're not going to change how other people are, but we can work on our reaction to those things. So I would focus on self first, and how one person, how you are coping, how you are creating ritual, and then you can invite those who wish to be a part of what you're doing, to what strategies you're using to heal, and then maybe it can spread to the other, maybe more anxious or disconnected members of the family.
Well, and you've talked about deep listening, and I think, that was so powerful to hear that definition of, it's truly just listening, present. You're not judging. That's real hard with family. Never mind everybody else in the world, but very, very hard. And, and yet you have to care for yourself. So to the extent it sounds like people can reach out with curiosity and not take on whatever stuff happens when you get an answer, I guess would be my only other thought, is, that it's rare everyone's going to have the same timeline or way of dealing with, and that to not own that yourself, because you're only in charge of you. Sometimes doesn't feel that way either, but I think Whew. Okay, so how about I think you touched on this, I think, unresolved grief that may be similar. I think we kind of touched on that. Is how about over the loss of a relationship, or, I think a lot of people felt like things, and I know we have like 30 seconds, but a lot of things happened during the pandemic, and losses of relationships happened already. But, in that vein, is there anything you would share about that? And I'm sorry, when we get the other one.
I think that I would do, again, I just feel like it comes back to ritual, having lighting a candle, moving through the day. It feels like when you lose somebody, when you're out of a relationship, gosh, it's just so painful. It's just so painful. So giving yourself time to think about that person, to think about all the good stuff that happened between you. If you want to bring in Buddhism, you can do loving kindness meditation for that person. You can just take 5 minutes and send them love and kindness, which also will relieve you of your pain. Those would be my ritual suggestions.
And it's often, in my experience, it seems it's a loss of what might have been, what could have been, our ideas of what something could have been, and what you spent time doing or not doing, and what you lost maybe during. It depends on, of course, the context of this, but it's truly a thing, especially if it's deep, long, however you'd share it. That's a part of us, and it's not, as you said, with any kind of loss, it's not going away, but we tend to it, and that's what I really want to leave. That's one of the things I got from this talk, is deep listening and tending to grief. It doesn't disappear, but it's part of us, and that's a good thing, because it means we experience something. It's not okay that we had these losses. I don't mean to sound flippant about that, but we have feelings, and tending to these feelings are
Yeah.
important. So I know we're over time. We could spend all day, Jennifer, so we might have to have you back for sure,
this was
as we
great.
often do. It's been wonderful. And thank you everybody for spending time with us today. I can tell just by attendance numbers and comments and chats that, this was really, really powerful, and it's not something we always take time to do. So thank you for bringing some of these thoughts to what we can take away into our lives.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you for these really great questions.
Oh, no, thank you, everybody.
Sincere,
we'll leave the room.
sincere love out there.
Oh, yes. My goodness. We will leave the room open just for a few minutes. So if people, I don't know if you could even find something in the chat, it's 8 miles long, but we will do our best to collect any resources. And Jennifer, if there's anything we missed, we will post the resources on the product page. That will be the recording of this. And then also keep an eye out for the podcast, which will be done in a few weeks, if not sooner. But yes, we do record everything we do so people can share it. And so thank you again, Jennifer. Thanks to Peyton and Gabriel, and thanks to everybody being here. All right. Bye, everyone. Take care of yourselves.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.